A new, scary home. The dust of Meadow Creek Market clung to everything, the rough-spun tunics of the vendors, the worn hides draped over rickety stalls, and most heavily to Elara's threadbare skirt. She hugged her knees, making herself as small as possible on the splintered wooden block. The air hummed with the low murmur of bartering, the bleating of tethered goats, and the persistent buzz of flies. Then a shadow fell over her, cool and vast. Elara slowly tilted her head back, her gaze climbing a formidable figure. The woman was tall, broader than any man Elara had ever seen, with shoulders like a blacksmith's anvil. Her face, framed by a thick, dark braid, was a landscape of weathered lines and sharp angles, unreadable as a winter sky. A heavy wool coat, the color of rich earth, hung from her frame, smelling faintly of wood smoke and pine. How much for the girl? The woman's voice was a low rumble, like distant thunder. The auctioneer, a greasy-haired man with a stained apron, rubbed his hands together. Strong, good teeth, Ma Kettle. Quick learner, they say. Good for chores, fetching water. 5 silver. Elara flinched. 5 silver. She was worth 5 silver. Ma Kettle's eyes, dark and deep-set, swept over Elara, lingering on her small, calloused hands. Elara held her breath. A coin pouch, heavy and worn, appeared in Ma Kettle's hand. The jingle of silver was sharp in the dusty air. "She'll do." And just like that, Elara was sold. Ma Kettle didn't speak another word, simply turned and strode towards a tired-looking mule tethered near a water trough. Elara scrambled after her, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The woman swung herself onto the mule's back with surprising grace, then gestured for Elara to climb on behind her. The mule's hide was warm and bristly beneath Elara's fingers, its slow, steady gait a hypnotic rhythm as they left the market's cacophony behind. The path quickly narrowed, leaving the dusty plains for the rising slopes of the whispering peaks. The air grew thinner, sharper, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. Elara clung to Ma Kettle's sturdy waist, her eyes wide with apprehension. The trees grew taller, their branches intertwining overhead to form a dim, green canopy. The silence was profound, broken only by the mule's soft snorts and the occasional rustle of unseen creatures in the undergrowth. Mile after mile they climbed, the sun a distant memory, replaced by the cool, encroaching shadows of the mountains. The world seemed to shrink around them, the vastness of the sky consumed by the encroaching peaks. Just as Elara thought her teeth would chatter loose from the biting cold, Ma Kettle reined in the mule. They had arrived. The cabin was nestled in a small clearing, a solitary outpost against the towering dark mountainsides. It was built of rough-hewn logs, smoke curling lazily from a stone chimney. A small, unkempt garden patch lay beside it, guarded by a split-rail fence. A lean-to, likely for the mule, stood nearby. No other sign of human habitation marred the ancient, silent wilderness. Ma Kettle dismounted, her movements fluid despite her size, and reached a hand down to Elara. Her grip was firm, surprisingly gentle. Elara slid to the ground, her legs stiff and wobbly. The air here was pristine, cold, and carried the sharp tang of wood smoke and wild herbs. Ma Kettle pushed open the cabin door, revealing a single, large room with a roaring stone hearth dominating one wall. The light from the fire flickered, dancing across simple, sturdy furniture, a rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, and a narrow cot tucked into a corner. "This is it." Ma Kettle's voice was flat, devoid of welcome or disdain. Your new home. Elara swallowed hard, her gaze sweeping from the imposing woman to the isolated cabin, then out the open doorway to the looming, silent mountains. A shiver, not entirely from the cold, traced its way down her spine. This was a new home, certainly, and undeniably, terrifyingly scary. Chores and whispers of the past. Days flowed into a rhythm of labor, each dawn unfurling a fresh scroll of duties. Elara's hands, once soft from urban life, rapidly toughened. Her morning ritual became the trek to the spring, a cold, clear ribbon of water cascading down the mountainside. The wooden buckets, initially a challenge, grew lighter with each journey as her stride lengthened and her back straightened with newfound resilience. She mastered splitting kindling, carefully reducing larger logs to neat stacks for the hearth, the crisp thwack of the small hatchet a surprisingly satisfying sound. Sweeping the hard-packed earth floor of Ma Kettle's cabin was another ceaseless chore, dust motes pirouetting in the sunlight that speared through the single window. Elara moved through these tasks in quiet solitude, the mountain vastness echoing the profound emptiness in her heart. Ma Kettle, a silent, formidable presence, rarely offered a compliment or a criticism, her approval conveyed by the absence of a scowl. Elara often felt spectral, an unacknowledged silhouette, against a backdrop of stark realities and practical needs. One sharp afternoon, a metallic crack shattered the stillness. Elara, gathering fallen pine cones, turned to see Ma Kettle beside a gnarled stump, her usually impassive face twisted in a rare display of exasperation. The head of her old felling axe lay on the ground, severed from its splintered handle. "Blast and botheration," Ma Kettle grumbled, her voice a low rumble. She nudged the broken tool with her boot. "Just my luck. Now I'll have to wait till the spring thaw for Silas to ride in with a new one. Can't do a proper day's work with a snapped axe." The rest of the day, Ma Kettle's mood was as leaden as the winter sky. She wrestled with a dull, clumsy handsaw, the effort of cutting even small logs for the evening fire clearly taxing her. Elara watched, a familiar ache stirring in her chest. The sight of Ma Kettle struggling with inadequate tools, the frustrated grunts, the slow, inefficient movements, snagged a long dormant thread of memory. She closed her eyes, and suddenly, the scent of coal smoke filled her nostrils, mingling with the sharp tang of hot metal. The rhythmic clang of a hammer striking iron echoed in her mind, a comforting lullaby from a lifetime ago. She saw her papa, his broad back silhouetted against the fiery maw of the forge, sparks showering like golden rain. He'd taught her the names of every tool, the secrets of annealing and tempering, the precise force needed to shape stubborn metal. She'd spent countless hours in his shop, a small, inquisitive shadow, absorbing every lesson, every nuance of his craft. He would hum while he worked, a low, tuneless melody that spoke of satisfaction and purpose. The memory was bittersweet, a phantom limb of her past. It was a world away from this rugged mountain existence, yet seeing Ma Kettle's broken axe, her exasperation palpable, ignited a flicker of an idea within Elara. It was a small, fragile spark, easily extinguished, but it was there, a whisper of a forgotten skill, a possibility she hadn't dared to consider. The clang of the hammer, the roar of the bellows, those were the sounds of her own true history. A hidden talent. The scent of damp earth and something vaguely metallic hung heavy in Ma Kettle's shed. A familiar aroma that had begun to replace the sweet floral notes of her former life. Elara, tasked with stacking kindling, found herself drawn to a darker, dustier corner, where shadows clung like persistent cobwebs. Her fingers, still tender from unfamiliar chores, brushed against something cold and rough. Peering closer, she discerned a haphazard pile of forgotten implements, a hammer missing its claw, a saw with a jagged, broken blade, and a collection of nails fused together by rust. A dull ache throbbed in her wrist, a reminder of the relentless digging she'd endured earlier. Ma Kettle, with her booming voice and unyielding demands, had insisted the potato patch be expanded, and Elara, despite her protests, had been handed a shovel. It had snapped a few hours later, the wooden handle splintering with a sharp crack that had echoed her own internal fracture. Ma Kettle had merely grumbled about lazy women and broken tools, tossing the ruined implement aside with a dismissive wave. Now Elara's gaze settled on that same broken shovel, propped against a stack of worn-out horse blankets. The splintered wood looked beyond repair, yet something stirred within her. It wasn't defiance, not yet, but a flicker of something quieter, more resolute. She remembered her papa, his strong hands, calloused and stained with soot and oil, meticulously repairing a wagon wheel spoke. He'd taught her the names of every tool, the purpose of each notch and curve. "A good craftsman knows their tools, Elara," he'd always said, his voice a low rumble, "and a true one respects the material." Hesitantly, she reached for a small, curved rasp, its teeth dulled by time but still discernible. Her fingers traced the rough grain of the broken handle. It would need to be smoothed, reinforced. Her papa had often used a technique of binding and shaping, making the repair stronger than the original break. A faint memory surfaced, the pungent smell of linseed oil, the feel of fine sawdust between her fingers as she helped him sand a freshly carved piece of wood. With a deep breath, Elara selected a few other items. A small, sturdy-looking file, its handle wrapped in decaying twine, and a coil of stiff, thin wire that had likely once bound a bale of hay. The air in the shed seemed to thicken, charged with a subtle tension. This was not just about fixing a shovel, it was about reclaiming a small piece of herself. Each hesitant movement was a silent rebellion against the drudgery, against the crushing weight of her new reality. She carefully positioned the broken handle on a discarded wooden crate, its surface scarred with axe marks. The rasp felt surprisingly natural in her grip, a distant echo of the familiar weight of her papa's tools. As she began to scrape away the jagged splinters, a fine dust drifted into the air, catching the weak light filtering through a grimy window. The rough wood slowly yielded to her efforts, revealing a smoother, albeit still imperfect, surface. A faint smile touched her lips, a rare, fleeting expression in her new, harsh life. She wasn't just mending a shovel, she was mending a piece of herself, one careful, deliberate scrape at a time. The quiet hum of the shed, once oppressive, now felt like a secret accomplice. The challenge. The clang of metal on metal, a dull, rhythmic thud, echoed faintly from the small, ramshackle shed behind the cabin. Elara, her brow furrowed in concentration, braced the bent shovel against a rough-hewn log, striking it with a heavy, misshapen rock. Her hands, still raw from days of hauling firewood, trembled slightly with each impact, but her gaze remained fixed on the warped edge. Papa had taught her that even the most stubborn metal could be persuaded with persistence and a keen eye. A shadow fell over her, cutting off the already sparse afternoon light. Elara froze, the rock clattering to the dirt. Slowly she turned, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Ma Kettle stood framed in the doorway, her formidable figure silhouetted against the pale sky, a shotgun cradled loosely in the crook of her arm. Elara braced herself for the usual gruff reprimand, perhaps even a sharp blow for wasting time, but Ma Kettle said nothing. Her eyes, usually narrowed in suspicion or assessment, were wide with an unfamiliar, almost thoughtful expression. They scanned Elara's makeshift anvil, the discarded tools, a broken hammerhead, a rusted file, then settled on the partially straightened shovel. Elara could feel the intensity of that silent scrutiny, a warmth creeping up her neck. "Just trying to make it useful, ma'am?" Elara stammered, her voice barely a whisper. She gestured weakly at the shovel. "Papa, he used to say that a tool, even a broken one, had a story, and a good hand could help it finish telling it." Her gaze flickered to the ground, embarrassed by her sudden eloquence. "He knew a little about shaping metal, said it was about understanding its memory, its willingness to bend." A low grunt rumbled in Ma Kettle's chest. It wasn't a sound of anger, nor amusement, but something akin to grudging acknowledgment. She slowly lowered the shotgun, resting its butt on the ground. Her eyes, still holding that strange, discerning glint, drifted past Elara to a stack of neglected implements near the shed's far wall. Among them, a heavy felling axe lay propped, its head split clean down the middle, the handle splintered and useless. It was a casualty of some monumental effort, long abandoned. Ma Kettle's gaze returned to Elara, piercing and direct. "That axe," she stated, her voice a low rasp, cutting through the quiet afternoon air. "Been like that since the last winter. Good steel once." She paused, a challenge etched into the lines around her mouth. "Can you fix this little bird?" Elara's breath caught. The axe was a far cry from a bent shovel. It would require real forging, heat, shaping, a skill she hadn't practiced since her father's passing. Fear, cold and sharp, pricked at her. But then, another emotion stirred, something warmer, more resilient, a flicker of hope. Ma Kettle wasn't angry. She was testing her. Elara met Ma Kettle's unwavering stare, a spark igniting deep within her. The challenge was daunting, but the unspoken trust it implied was a revelation. I can try, ma'am," she said, her voice steadier this time, a quiet determination blooming in her chest, "if I have the right things." Sparks of hope. The smithy air, heavy with the mingling scents of coal smoke and aged iron, enveloped Elara. Sunbeams, splintered by grimy panes, illuminated a dance of dust motes and the seasoned surfaces of tools arranged in meticulous rows. Before her stood a stout, compact forge, its belly brimming with dull coal. Ma Kettle, a stark silhouette framed by the entrance, observed, arms crossed, her expression as inscrutable as river rocks. "Get to it, girl," Ma Kettle's voice, raspy as dry leaves skittering underfoot, broke the silence. "Don't just gawk. It won't fix itself." Elara swallowed, her heart a nervous drumbeat against her ribs. This was it. Her hands, still faintly calloused from her father's forge, gave a slight tremor. She grasped the tongs, their long handles cool beneath her fingers, and carefully nestled the broken axe head into the coal's heart. A pump of the bellows, a soft hiss of air, stirred the embers. A subtle, almost imperceptible warmth began to emanate from the forge. The bellows' rhythm swiftly commanded her focus. Push, pull, push, pull. The coal, initially sluggish, began to respond. Tiny red veins threading through the black. A flicker of orange sparked. Then, a steady glow, intensifying and radiating warmth onto Elara's face and arms. dissolving the apprehension that had coiled within her. This felt familiar, a strange sort of homecoming. Ma Kettle remained a silent, watchful sentinel. Elara felt the weight of her gaze, a pressure that sharpened her concentration. She recalled her papa's gentle guidance, the strength of his hands over hers at the anvil. "The metal speaks, Elara," he would always say. "Listen to its whispers." The axe head, at first a dull gray, began to blush. A deep cherry red bloomed across its surface, growing hotter, brighter, until it pulsed with an inner fire. With a practiced hand, Elara retrieved it from the coals, the tongs clanking softly. The glowing metal radiated an intense heat, painting the surrounding air with shimmering distortions. She placed it on the small anvil, its face scarred by countless impacts. The hammer, lighter than her papa's yet substantial, felt right in her grasp. She lifted it, then brought it down, not with brute force, but with a controlled, deliberate strike. Clang! A dazzling spray of orange sparks erupted, trailing fiery arcs against the smithy's dimness. The sound, sharp and clear, resonated through the confined space. Elara struck again, then again, adjusting her grip, her angle, coaxing the stubborn metal. Each blow was precise, aimed at shaping the fractured edge, forcing the steel's grain to align. Pliable and alive under the hammer, the metal slowly yielded to her will. Sweat beaded on Elara's forehead, tracing paths through faint smudges of coal dust. Her muscles, unused to such intense labor, began to ache. Yet a thrill of satisfaction surged through her. The rhythmic ringing of hammer on anvil, the shower of sparks, the mingling scents of burning coal and hot metal, it all coalesced into a symphony of creation. Ma Kettle shifted, a subtle movement that caught Elara's peripheral vision. A flicker of something, surprise, crossed the older woman's usually impassive face, quickly veiled once more. Elara, however, had seen it. A spark of hope ignited within her, a faint glow mirroring the one in the forge. She hammered on, a determined set to her jaw, the sound of metal on metal proclaiming her silent defiance. The forged axe. Sweat beaded on Elara's brow, trickling down her temple and catching in the fine dust that coated her skin. The forge roared, a hungry beast consuming the last vestiges of twilight. Her hammer rose and fell with a rhythmic clang, the sound echoing off the rough-hewn walls of the smithy, a counterpoint to the distant hoot of an owl. The axe-head, a mangled piece of steel just days ago, now glowed a vibrant orange, yielding to her insistent will. Her initial tremor had long since vanished, replaced by a focused intensity that bordered on obsession. She remembered Ma Kettle's gruff instructions, the precise angle of the bevel, the weight distribution. Each strike was deliberate, not just an act of force, but a conversation with the metal, coaxing it into the shape she envisioned. The air was thick, with the tang of coal smoke and the metallic scent of heated iron, a perfume she'd known since childhood. This wasn't just mending, this was creation. Finally, with a final ringing blow that sent sparks dancing like fireflies, Elara plunged the axe head into the quenching trough. A hiss erupted, a cloud of steam billowed, and the air shimmered with the abrupt temperature change. She watched the steel cool, the vibrant orange fading to a dull red, then to the familiar dark gray, now hardened and true. The handle, salvaged from a fallen oak, had been carefully shaped and fitted, the grain running perfectly to withstand the shock of impact. She ran a calloused thumb along the newly sharpened edge, a keen blade that could shave hair from her arm. It felt balanced, a natural extension of her hand. The next morning, the sun was just cresting the eastern peaks when Elara approached the cabin, the axe cradled in her arms like a precious, if formidable infant. Ma Kettle sat on her porch, whittling a piece of cedar, her gaze as sharp as the knife in her hand. She didn't look up immediately, but Elara felt the weight of her scrutiny. "It's done, Ma Kettle," Elara said, her voice steady despite a flutter in her stomach. She extended the axe, presenting it hilt first. Ma Kettle paused her whittling, her movements slow and deliberate. Her eyes, usually so unreadable, narrowed as she took the axe. She tested its weight, her weathered fingers tracing the lines of the handle, the curve of the bit. A faint, almost imperceptible nod. Then she walked over to a thick, gnarled log that served as a chopping block near the edge of the clearing. Without a word, Ma Kettle raised the axe. The movement was fluid, powerful, a stark contrast to her usual stoic stillness. The blade descended with a whistling hum, biting deep into the seasoned wood. A clean crack echoed through the quiet morning, and a sizable chunk of the log split away, falling cleanly to the earth. She repeated the action again and again, each swing precise and effortless. The wood surrendered under the relentless, sharp bite of the axe. Elara watched, holding her breath. She expected a grunt, perhaps a dismissive wave. Instead, Ma Kettle lowered the axe, the edge glinting in the morning light, still pristine. She turned, her gaze meeting Elara's, and for the first time, Elara saw something beyond the usual gruffness. It was a flicker of acknowledgement, a silent nod of respect. A faint, almost imperceptible line softened around Ma Kettle's lips. "Good," Ma Kettle grunted, her voice rough but devoid of its usual edge. "Better than it was." She handed the axe back, her touch surprisingly gentle. "Keep it sharp." The simple words, so understated, resonated with the force of an avalanche in Elara's heart. A warmth spread through her chest, a feeling of accomplishment deeper than any gold she'd ever handled. It wasn't just an axe. It was a bridge, forged in fire and sweat, between two solitary souls. A choice offered. The clanging resonance of steel on steel had faded, replaced by the crackle of the forged coals cooling. Ma Kettle stood, a formidable silhouette against the dying embers, her calloused hands resting on her hips. Her gaze, usually as hard and unyielding as the iron she worked, softened as it lingered on Elara. A slow, almost imperceptible shift occurred in Ma Kettle's rugged features. The corners of her mouth, habitually set in a stern line, twitched upwards, forming a rare, genuine smile. It wasn't a wide, boisterous grin, but a subtle curving that transformed her face, stripping away years of hardship and revealing a flicker of warmth. "Well, I'll be," Ma Kettle rumbled, her voice surprisingly soft, a stark contrast to the usual gravelly tone. She picked up the newly forged horseshoe, still warm to the touch, and turned it over in her hands. The intricate twist in the metal, the perfectly formed nail holes, the balanced curve. It was the work of a master, not a mere apprentice. Elara, still clutching the hammer, felt a blush creep up her neck, a strange mix of pride and apprehension. She had expected a grunt of approval, perhaps a nod, but this was entirely new territory. Ma Kettle looked at Elara, her eyes, usually narrowed in suspicion, now wide with a dawning realization. "You ain't just handy, girl, You're an artisan. That horseshoe, it's got a soul to it. Never seen work quite like it. Not since, well, not ever, really." Her words hung in the air, weighty and sincere. The truth, now undeniable, settled between them. Elara was not just a helpful pair of hands, a strong back for hauling ore, but a skilled blacksmith, capable of intricate and demanding work. The idea that she had purchased such talent for a pittance must have been a bitter pill for Ma Kettle's pragmatic mind. Yet her expression held no resentment, only profound respect. "The way you handled that hammer, the precision you know your way around a forge better than most men I've met, better than I do on some days." Ma Kettle's admission was a shock, a concession from a woman who rarely yielded an inch. She walked over to the workbench, picked up a discarded piece of twisted metal, a testament to her own less-than-perfect attempts, and tossed it back into the scrap bin with a resigned sigh. She turned back to Elara, her smile fading, replaced by a thoughtful solemnity. The air grew thick with unspoken meaning. Elara braced herself, unsure what revelation this new understanding would bring. "Elara," Ma Kettle began, her voice regaining a hint of its usual gravel, though laced with an unfamiliar earnestness. "I bought you. That much is true. But what I bought, it's worth more than any coin. I see that now." She paused, her gaze piercing, unwavering. "So, I'm offering you a choice. A real choice, not the kind life usually throws at us." Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it, the moment she had dared to dream of, yet never truly believed would come. "You can stay here," Ma Kettle continued, gesturing around the forge. "Work alongside me, not as a purchased hand, but as a partner. You'd have a roof, food, and a forge that'll sing under your hammer. This place could be yours, eventually, if you prove you want it." Ma Kettle's eyes held a flicker of something close to loneliness, an invitation to companionship, a shared purpose. "Or," Ma Kettle said, her voice dropping, "you can earn your freedom, work for me for 2 years, and every penny you help bring in, beyond your keep, will be put aside for you. At the end of that time, you walk away, a free woman with a stake to start your own life. You pick the path, Elara. What'll it be?" The offer hung in the air, a heavy, shimmering weight. 2 years, freedom, or a life with the formidable, yet now oddly compelling, Ma Kettle. The scent of coal smoke and possibility filled Elara's lungs. Forging a new life. The scent of pine and damp earth still clung to Elara, a wilder perfume than any she'd known in the dusty lowlands. She watched Ma Kettle, a silhouette against the roaring forge, her movements economical and powerful. The old woman hadn't spoken since her brusque offer of a small plot of land for a smithy. It hung in the air, heavier than the anvil, demanding a decision. Fear, that familiar, cold knot in her stomach, had finally begun to loosen its grip. It was replaced now by a burgeoning sense of possibility, a quiet, insistent hum in her blood. Elara thought of the alternatives. Return to the valley? To what? A life of subservience, of being owned, of a future already written by others. Here, in this raw, unyielding landscape, there was nothing but the present and the future she could carve with her own hands. Ma Kettle wasn't kind in the gentle way of women Elara had known, but she was fair. She respected skill, effort, and independence. These were qualities Elara possessed in abundance, though they had long been stifled. A spark flew from Ma Kettle's hammer, illuminating the lines of concentration on her weathered face. Elara had seen that same focus in her own father's eyes, a dedication to the metal that transcended mere labor. It was an artistry, a dialogue between fire and steel. Ma Kettle's offer wasn't a charity. It was an investment in capability. "I'll stay," Elara said, her voice steadier than she expected. Ma Kettle paused, hammer mid-air, and turned a slow, appraising gaze on Elara. No smile, no nod, just a lingering stare that seemed to probe her intentions. Elara met it directly, a newfound resolve hardening her own usually timid eyes. "Good," Ma Kettle grunted, returning to her work. "Plenty of rock near the creek for a foundation. Timber's plentiful. Just don't expect me to hold your hand." And so began the arduous task. Elara, with only a few borrowed tools and the strength of her own two hands, began to clear a small patch of land beside Ma Kettle's cabin. Days blurred into a rhythm of labor, hauling stones, felling smaller trees, stripping bark. Her muscles ached with a deep, satisfying fatigue she'd never known. She learned to read the sky for rain, to identify the sturdiest timber, to listen to the whisper of the wind through the pines. Ma Kettle offered no help, but neither did she hinder, her presence a silent, watchful sentinel. Elara remembered the layout of her father's smithy, the precise placement of the forge, the anvil, the water trough. She envisioned her own smaller, more personal space. The forge would be built into the side of a rocky outcrop, using the natural stone for insulation. She'd construct a lean-to roof from thick planks, leaving one side open to the elements, embracing the wildness of her new home. The first fire in her makeshift forge sent plumes of smoke curling into the crisp mountain air. The heat radiating from the coals was a comforting, familiar presence. She held a scrap of iron, a piece of old wagon wheel found abandoned by the creek, and thrust it into the flames. The orange glow, the hiss of metal, the rhythmic clang of hammer on anvil. These were the sounds of her rebirth. She wasn't forging a grand sword or an intricate gate, but a simple hook, then a sturdy hinge. Each strike was a declaration, each spark a tiny celebration. This wasn't just metal she was shaping. It was her future, forged in fire and sweat, free and beholden to no one. Jed's arrival and new possibilities. The winding trail, barely more than a deer path, groaned under the weight of Jedediah Finch's pack mule. Dust, fine as flour, puffed with each hoof fall, clinging to his worn leather boots. Jed hummed a tuneless melody, his gaze sweeping the tree-lined ascent. He'd made this trip to Ma Kettle's cabin twice a year for the past decade, a quiet ritual of trade and gossip. Usually, it was a solitary journey, the only sounds the rustle of leaves and the distant cry of a hawk. Today, however, a new scent drifted on the crisp autumn air, coal smoke, thick and pungent, mingled with the unmistakable tang of hot iron. Jed's bushy brows furrowed in surprise. Ma Kettle, as far as he knew, had no need for a forge. She was a woman of the earth, her needs simple: flour, coffee, a bolt of calico now and then. His mule, sensing the approaching stop, snorted and quickened its pace. Rounding the final bend, the cabin appeared, nestled amongst the pines. And there it was. Not a haphazard campfire, but a proper forge, spewing sparks into the afternoon sun. A young woman, her face smudged with soot, hair pulled back in a practical braid, stood at the anvil, a hammer rising and falling with rhythmic precision. Elara, lost in the rhythm of her work, didn't notice him until the mule snorted loudly. She jumped, the hammer clattering against the anvil. her eyes wide with a flicker of old fear. Jed, however, saw only the gleaming iron in her hands, a delicate yet sturdy hinge taking shape. "Well now, ain't this a sight for sore eyes?" Jed's voice, a warm rumble, filled the air. He dismounted, a wide, easy smile on his face. "Ma Kettle, you've been holding out on me. A smithy, and a fine one by the looks of it." Ma Kettle emerged from the cabin, her expression unreadable as always. She held a chipped enamel mug, steam curling from its rim. "Jedediah, thought you'd forgotten the way." Her gaze flickered to Elara, then back to Jed. "She's Elara, my new help." Elara dipped her head, her cheeks flushing. The fear was quickly replaced by a quiet defiance. She hadn't been help for weeks. She was a smith. Jed, however, was already examining the hinge she'd been working on. His fingers, calloused from years of handling goods, traced the smooth curve of the metal. "Help, you say?" Jed chuckled, a knowing glint in his eyes. "This ain't help, Ma Kettle. This is craftsmanship." He looked at Elara directly, his smile gentler now. "That's a neat bit of work, young lady. Clean lines, good weight. You got a steady hand." Elara felt a strange warmth spread through her chest. Praise for her work was a rare thing, especially from a stranger. "Thank you," she mumbled, her gaze fixed on the ground. "Thank me? I should be thanking you. A forge out here, and work like this. Why, the folks down in Prosperity Gulch would pay a pretty penny for such things. Ain't a decent smith south of the Widow's Peak, not since old man Hemlock took ill." He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "They're always looking for good hinges, wagon parts, even decorative bits for the saloon doors. A new smith, a skilled smith, would be a welcome sight." Ma Kettle, typically impervious to such talk, remained silent, but Elara felt a tremor of excitement. Prosperity Gulch. A town. People. Her world had been so small, so contained. Jed continued, his voice weaving a tapestry of possibility. "Heard tell, the new general store in Prosperity is looking to expand their inventory. Old Silas, bless his heart, can barely keep his shelves stocked with decent tools. And the mining outfits, well, they chew through parts faster than a beaver through a willow tree. You got a talent, Elara. A genuine talent. This mountain ain't big enough to hold it." Elara's heart pounded. The mountain had been her prison, then her refuge, and now, perhaps, it was a stepping stone. Jed's words were a window, not just to a town, but to a life beyond the solitary rhythm of the forge, a world where her skills held real value. The fear still lingered, a phantom echo, but it was overshadowed by a burgeoning sense of purpose, a pull towards the possibilities Jed had so casually laid before her.